And the hush fell over the crowd.
Come together this fast.
So we try to be consistent here at SGDA. So like in the last panel, we had one person be late, and we're trying to do that again. They'll be here shortly. Don't worry about it. We're just gonna go right off. Two questions. Did you go to college? And if so, where? And if that is your college, you must give a holler or a clap or a snap, anything. Something to say that you are here right now. So, did you go to college?
Yes, I went to college. I went to undergrad at UC Irvine. So I think I'm going to win. And I don't even want to talk about grad school now, because no one's going to have gone to SMU. See, no one went to SMU.
My turn. Let's see. I also went to UCI. Graduated in 2003 with a BS in computer science. And didn't do grad school, just jumped right into the industry.
I went to college at Texas A&M University. Thanks, guys. And grad school for international affairs at the same place. Real excited, y'all.
Wait, we have 2 designers with CS degrees? That's interesting.
Only one can leave.
No, we can just go on. I just think it's interesting.
Okay. What game are you playing right now?
Let's see, Dad of War, God of War. Let's see, Dishonored, Death of the Outsider, and Divinity Original Sin 2, but I will probably be playing that one forever.
All right, why that one?
Because it's very long. There's a lot to do.
Cool. For me, let's see, I've been kind of on a puzzle kick lately. So just got back to playing Talos Principle, did my second or third cleared playthrough on Into the Breach, and then just started jumping into Battletech because robots are awesome.
Can everyone hear me fine without the mic? I'm a loud guy.
Yeah.
Alright.
I think it's more so for the camera.
Oh. Alright, fair enough. I'm currently playing Battletech way more than I probably should be. I had just started Fallout 4, which I put off playing because it's going to take up all of my life. And then I immediately put it to the side to play Battletech, and other than that, I pretty much just play Dungeons & Dragons and League of Legends. I don't know which one was getting the applause. I hope it was D&D.
If you guys don't play D&D, there's something wrong with you.
So, pro tip from Jim Rivers, if you don't play D&D, don't mention that in interviews. What designers do you idolize? What? Like the work, the direction that made you identify with your style?
What are you guys thinking? I got it prepared. Let's see. So I think my favorite designer of all time would be Will Wright. For those that don't know, he's the guy that made The Sims and stuff. He gives the best talks I've ever attended with a light amount of comedy and a lot of great information. He's also an innovator, and I really respect that in the industry. I believe that we need to innovate and just push ourselves forward and not just rehash a bunch of clone games. And Will Wright is notorious for always trying new things and experimenting, and I think that's vitally important in our industry. Second to that, there's quite a few, so I'll just cut it to 3. Warren Spector, he's kind of a mentor of mine. He and I worked together a bit on System Shock, and he's just a really great guy, very humble about everything that he's done in the industry, but incredibly knowledgeable, has a great work ethic and process. I've learned a lot from him. Let's see, who else is there? And another designer who I really respect, Jake Solomon, the guy in charge of XCOM from Firaxis. Before that, he was doing some other stuff very similar to XCOM. That's just kind of his bread and butter. I really respect his intuition when it comes to rebooting older franchises and older systems and incorporating them into something a modern audience can enjoy. It's definitely something that's very challenging, and it takes a really, really crafty designer to execute well on that. I think XCOM did a great job on rebooting the old series. That's it for me.
Thank you, Jason.
I'm a big fan of a lot of Arcane's games, so I really enjoyed the work of Harvey Smith. I love their gameplay. I love the way that they marry their aesthetic. They create something that's very easy to, you know what it is when you see it, and it feels familiar, but it doesn't feel like something you've quite seen before, and I think that's really refreshing. I've been very fortunate to work with Josh Sawyer and Eric Fenstermaker, who are both fantastic designers and have taught me a lot about centering the player in a game's story and making room for the player to define their character, to define their motivations, and to carve their own path through a world.
I'm going to be a little weird, and I'm going to say that I don't actually have a lot of video game designers that I idolize. Not that I'm saying there aren't plenty that should be idolized, I just don't remember their names. The people... Okay, whoever did the Shadow of Mordor, Shadow of War series, that Nemesis system that they designed is probably one of the best things I've ever seen for making the players actually feel genuine emotion towards an AI character, which is brilliant. Very similarly, the narrative designers from Telltale are pretty much the only people who, aside from the Shadows of War people, make me feel emotions that aren't just want to kill this person, want to continue the next level type of thing. They're amazing at evoking emotion. And then other than that, Mark Rosewater, who's not a video game designer, he's the head of Magic the Gathering R&D, because that man has tight controls over how to make something both balanced and really immersive, from a lore to mechanics relationship, which is something that is insanely hard to do.
Benson Russell!
Only 20 fail crit, sorry.
See, D&D, what I said.
I don't want to answer the hard question to start off, so
Please.
how about, okay, well, I'll do the fun one. What is your favorite, game dev horror story to tell?
We could be here all day.
Yeah. Just pick one. Anyone.
All right.
This, we'll go down the line. Don't worry.
A fun one, I won't name names, it's a large studio at the time I was working on oh fuck it, I was working at EA LA. It's a totally different studio now, who cares? Pacific Assault, and one of the executive producers was, he just always wanted to see more explosions. Like that was his thing. He just like, pretty much. And actually, Michael Bay came to the studio, and the guy knew him. Because, anyways, not lying on that at all. So what we did was we got sick and tired of it. So one day, one of our guys wrote a randomizer that literally just randomly spawned explosions everywhere in like the level where you're supposed to have like the calm walkthrough. This is great. Ship that. That's awesome. He didn't know it was a joke. He did not get it. So I was like, that's the lightest. That's the first one that comes. I got more.
Or, Greg, you saw you reached the show.
Let's go sequential.
Alright, so my favorite horror story is one where I was working at a studio. I'm also not going to name it, but we were working on a dinosaur game that took place on an island. I'm not going to say what game or company. We had everything planned for production. The game was going to be released late September, early October, and then Jurassic World got announced, and everyone just stared at the door where the boss was about to come in, and we knew it. Everyone stared at it for a good solid 30 seconds straight. Then he kicks open the door like Kramer. He's like, "All right, guys, we're shipping in March." We're like, "Ah!" It ended up being a little after that, but we ended up cutting 3 months off of development time.
That's a game ender.
Oh, I basically lived at the office. I think I went home just to shower and sometimes sleep.
You didn't recycle shirts from the company t-shirt thing?
No, but I did bring 2 changes of clothing.
Good details.
Is this real?
Yes, that's yours.
So I was going to share a story about crazy crunch and 110-hour weeks, but I don't want to. Crunch is already taken. So I'll go with a more fun story. I was working on a project at Obsidian with the wonderful Frank Kalikowski as our lead programmer, and we were working. I could just say what the project was. We were working on aliens, and we were trying to finish a milestone out. but we were encountering a bug, so the external environment was playing visual effects for rain, but we didn't hear any rain sound. And but we heard it on PC, but not on console. And so we were trying to fix the bug, and it was just me and Frank there, like around 9 o'clock at night. We were trying to fix the bug all day. And eventually we were kicking out new builds, trying things, and finally we tried it and it worked. We heard rain. And we said, great, we fixed the bug, we don't know how we fixed it, but it works now, let's ship it and send the milestone out, we're good. The next day, we got an email back from the publisher saying, hey, this bug is still there, we're not hearing any rain. We're like, what the hell, we heard it yesterday. And we loaded the build and we sent them, and sure enough, no, there's no rain sound, where'd it go? And then we realized, shit, it was raining outside last night. And we were hearing it, because we were testing it on like a great 501 surround sound system and everything, like sounds really realistic. But we didn't connect with like the rain sound that we were hearing was actually from the outside because we were there so damn late. And it was like, yes, we hear rain, we're done, let's go. So yeah, that's eventually we did fix it. And then the project was canceled a few months later, but not due to that.
So we were late in a project one time, and we done a lot of VO recording, and so one of the things we were keeping an eye out for was where we might have missed something, a line that needed to get picked up. And we come across this one conversation that we've recorded, and we noticed that a few lines are missing. That's weird. We look, we see, well, yeah, this note was marked, the text is there, it hasn't changed, the note's approved, so it should have been recorded. And then we dig a little deeper and we realize this note has smart quotes in it, because our software that pulls dialogue out for recording, because we write with a lot of prose, stuff outside of quotes, is designed to pull anything that is between quotes and say, that's dialogue, put it into the actor's script and get it recorded. But it doesn't recognize smart quotes, which means that if someone has been drafting in Microsoft Word or a similar tool and they paste their work into the tool, it's not going to get caught. So we had a moment of panic of, how widespread is this? How much have we missed? Fortunately, it was not that much, and we still had time to do pickups, but there was definitely a moment of panic, and it just goes to show you all the things that you don't know really can hurt you sometimes.
Okay.
I bet you if you were to like tally up a lot of the like dev bugs that occur like that, copy and paste is probably the culprit for 90% of it.
Yep, that's the reason why most games are made.
So we're hearing a lot of your stories, and we're hearing a lot about like the scope was too big, or we had to cut this feature, or the deadline got pushed up, and a lot of business reasons, a lot of technical reasons can make you have to cut things that you really enjoy as a designer, that you think is innovative, or experiments. And I remember Jason was talking about Will Wright, experiments in pretty much every game. What, like, say, maybe creative arguments, maybe business arguments do you have, or to like try to find designs that are both business palatable and also experiments in a unique way?
This is just open.
And anyone. Yeah, go for it.
Alright, so when I was working on one of the Dungeon Defenders games, this was working on a live product, mind you, and I don't know if anyone played that game, but if you were playing it and you were competitive, the end game was just a hot mess. All of your stats were like 10,000, which means that your turrets, which are supposed to shoot little balls of energy, are essentially shooting lines of balls of energy. And it eventually got so fast, like the animation was so fast it was breaking when it would not fire. So we were talking about this big rebalance. We're going to rebalance the whole game, make it actually scalable, figure out things. And, well, there was no real way to test it effectively with the numbers we needed. So we ended up having this big talk, and it got suggested that we do a live, test weekend of the new changes. So the programmers and the designers got together, and we figured out a mathematical algorithm to convert all of the current items that existed in the game into the new stats that they would have, so that everyone was the same relative power level of where they were. And we do that for a weekend, and we revert it back, and we get everyone's feedback and see what they wanted. Well, the code to revert the changes from the weapons one way worked just fine. But reverting them back didn't work. So about half of the players ended up with completely unusable items. And the company had to just roll back everything that had been done for like a week and a half, because that was our last backup of everything, because someone decided, we're about to do a major overhaul, let's not back anything up. And because of that problem, the entire rebalance got scrapped, and then the project ended up dying about 6 months afterwards.
That's really the horror story.
No, I hated that game.
Oh, okay. One of the nice horror stories.
I was actually okay with it dying.
Oh, okay. It wasn't a horror story. It was a good story. I'm getting, well, another thing I was going to say is I found, to answer the question, or another answer to this, I think it depends on the studio, because different studios have different amounts of leeway. I've worked at studios where it's like, you do whatever frick you want. You know, they'll push schedules, they'll do whatever it takes, but they're going to put out the quality game that they want to put out. And then, yeah, then at the opposite end of it, which you hear the horror stories more of probably, where it's like, no, we need money, we have to meet a milestone.
So do you guys feel like it's a big part of it is the studio's culture, the studio's goals, and the resources they have to?
That's pretty much all it is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Plays into it. Yeah. I mean, I think it's, all right, so working at, I just started at Survios to VR, like in November. So they're very much, the one person. It's basically, their goal right now is, because VR is such a small space, and you can't do traditional, hey, let's just dump 5 years into a game, you'll never see a return on your investment. So instead, there's multiple projects that are going all at once, all the time, and they're designed to be 1 year, anything less, 6 months to a year and a half. But because we know that, or it's all to keep the budget down and all that kind of stuff, so we actually could see a profit or break even. But because we know that, and we're very much an anti-crunch culture, and we're also just, we don't want to waste work and the usual stuff. We try to use that as like a box, a limitation to say, okay, whatever we're going to do has to fit inside of this timeline. It has to fit in the, us, obviously VR is its own set of boxes. And now we have also the Survios arcade. We've opened our first one up, and so we want to develop games to take over something too. It's all these things come together, and it's like that kind of helps dictate schedules, and we do lots of course corrections, and we go, we'll do 2-week sprints and be like, okay, where were we over? Is that going to put us on the rest of the game? So we really do a good, we try to do the best job we can in managing that. That's one way to attack.
I have a story. So this applies to student developers, indies, small devs, even large devs. On a regular basis during your project, always ask the question, who is this game for? If you're making it for yourself, then push creativity all you want. But there is a balancing act between balancing creativity versus business goals. And that always needs to be in your sights at all times, especially if you're making a game for a market that is not yourself. Hopefully there is an alignment where you're making a game that you will want to play, but sometimes that doesn't happen in the industry. And it's the way you balance it is basically you separate yourself from the muck of it. You find your target audience, and never ever friends or family. They will never be honest with you. Sadly, ever. Find strangers, find acquaintances, find people that don't care if they hurt your feelings. They will be your best friends in life for game development, because they will give you the cold, honest truth if something's not fun, or if something doesn't appeal to them. If you're making, I don't know, a Dark Souls offshoot, and you're really passionate about it, you believe every idea you have in there is great, your friends and family aren't going to tell you your ideas aren't great, because that's going to hurt your feelings. So instead, find people that like those games on forums, run limited betas, and get that honest feedback, because that will allow you to course correct earlier as opposed to later, which is more costly and expensive. The other part of it is come up for air. Oftentimes during game development, we get so caught in the weeds and really into just, we got to hit this milestone, we got to meet our schedule. We forget to just come up for air and just look at the game holistically as a whole and see, is this coming together? Is all of this fun? Is this gelling? And sometimes the answer is no. And when the answer is no, you need to course correct again. So with any size team, you need to be adaptive, and you need to always just sanity check yourself and talk to your target market. Hopefully that's common sense, but if it's not, take notes.
I think understanding who your game is for is really great advice. There's actually a wonderful GDC talk by Jason Vanderberg called Engines of Play. It's actually a series of talks And one of the subjects he covers is understanding what player drives your game is designed to satisfy, and being very honest about it. Not every game is going to be the best at everything. So understanding what your game is really focused on accomplishing, and also understanding as a development team where your personal tastes overlap with that. So that if someone on the team says, well, I don't really like this aspect of it, this isn't working for me, understand, is this game meant to satisfy this player in this regard, or are they looking at something different? And understanding that, and I think being honest about it will help you, which doesn't mean that nobody has good feedback. It means there's lots of good feedback, but it's understanding how to slot that in and how to push towards a cohesive goal rather than sort of getting pulled apart by everybody's individual passions and tastes. And about cutting, I think definitely cutting earlier rather than later, before you've wasted the work, before you've put in the time. I think that's where coming up for air can be very helpful because, rather than, just sort of soldiering on your development track, understanding, are we still on target? Is the thing we're making working? Have we blown our budget one place we didn't expect? And if we don't think we can make everything that we really wanted to make, let's be realistic about that now so that we can polish the things we're going to keep. And so I think there's also something to be said for, putting in your essentials first and, building out your side content, your fluff, your would-be nice-to-haves later, so that you don't end up, a few months from release and realizing, like, we really need to cut something, but there's nothing here we can afford to cut.
Yeah, there's I wrote that yes, on everything they've said, 100%. But a lesson I've learned recently as well, when it comes to, let's call it a devil's advocate of cutting early. And it's not to say you shouldn't cut early, it's to say, be careful how you make cutting decisions. So I worked at Infinity Ward before where I'm at now. I worked on Infinite Warfare, the space one, COD from 2 years ago. And the problem was they were trying to be very cognizant of that, and while they were cutting early, what ended up happening was it ended up disheartening. They cut so much that disheartened so many people, and then we ended up getting other internal Activision studios to come on board because they realized they needed the help. Then all of a sudden those studios would take up things. And we're sitting here saying things like, hey, leadership said we can't do this feature, or you cut this feature. This company's now doing it, and they're doing it the way we wanted to do it in the first place. What the hell? And then you had a whole bunch of just disenfranchised people that went about it, which is something I've never experienced. So I've always been of the mindset of like, yeah, cut the frick early as much as possible, but I guess there is a chance to go too far in the opposite direction. Too much of a good thing, I guess. That whole thing.
Okay. Very good. Off that and what you guys are saying, it can be really hard to figure out what the goals of your game are and who is your target market. I think like a lot of beginning designers, when you ask them, who's this game for? They say everyone. That's the dream. You want everyone to play your game. No. But that's not.
I don't even think that's a good statement.
Thank you, Craig. I was saying that it's a bad thing.
You said it's the dream. I think that's a bad dream.
Would you like to talk more about that?
Okay. So this one is an entirely personal opinion. Feel free to discard this if you don't like it. But I think that most games, unless you're like making a giant AAA game with 5 years and like tens of millions of dollars budget. Also, background, I come from like a AA and an indie space, not the AAA experience, so that, that flavors my opinion. You really need to find the people who are going to care a lot about your game and not just say, hey, let's get everyone interested a little bit. No, you want a smaller core of people who will die hard be your best fans and your advertisement. Don't think I've ever seen a game that goes, let's appeal to everyone, ever be even close to as good as a game that says, let's get a small group of people to love it.
Actually, makes sense.
I disagree, kinda. So, I'm a little biased on this one. So, I worked on World of Warcraft, and I would say that game appeals to a very, very large demographic, and probably raise your hand if you have never played WoW. Really? Not once? Ever?
You got two in a row panel here.
Holy crap! Never mind.
I tried the demo when it first came out.
And I did say, coming from a non-AAA space, that's like the definition of a AAA game.
To be fair, you have a cash printing machine.
So the point I was going to make is, if you have the budget, and if you're at a large studio, odds are half of you in the room probably will end up at a large AAA studio just because they have the most jobs available. There are some recruiters in the audience right now that work at a large studio that have a lot of positions available. They have a very high quality bar, and they want to cast as wide of a net as possible to maximize their profits. So getting as many people as possible to get into the game that spans different genres is a very large goal for these companies, but it's also achievable. World of Warcraft is one example. There, Minecraft. Just think of the top-selling games out there. They cast a very wide net. Minecraft, I don't think was designed initially to do that, but it caught on. And I don't think we should limit ourselves as far as who is this game for, who is it for, and instead just look at what sort of game do we want to make as developers. And if it's a great game, then naturally it will just attract a lot of people. Unless you're trying to appeal to, I don't know, a specific demographic that really likes underwater basket weaving simulators, then you have a very, very narrow audience. In VR.
But if the underwater basket weaving simulator game is really good, there will be a hardcore group of people that like that.
With loot boxes.
Another aspect to marketability and to getting eyes on your product that we're not talking about here, and that's how shareable is your game. You know, World of Warcraft is, I think part of the appeal for it is online multiplayer. People play with their friends, they make friends, they join guilds, and I was one of the people who raised my hand, so I have not personally experienced this, but I know people who love online multiplayer, and that community building is part of the experience for them. So, you know, some of the games we're talking about that have that, and Minecraft as well. That's it has a multiplayer aspect to it, but it's also very shareable, and that's something that I'm hearing people talk about more and more is how do you get Twitch streamers to stream your game? How do you get people to play your game in a way that you're going to share it with their community? And there are kinds of games that are going to lend themselves to that experience a lot more, and kinds of games that aren't. I think it would be interesting, you know, we're talking about Minecraft as a mega hit, for instance, to look at sort of the exposure to play rate for Minecraft. Like how many people have heard of Minecraft? How many people have watched someone play Minecraft on YouTube? And how many people have played Minecraft on their own time? And if so, how much? I think there are a lot of things going on here, and it's some of them are going to be more applicable to certain kinds of games than others.
You know, and also, I'd say is a hybrid as well between what you two were saying. I think there's definitely the amount of mass market appeal a business end of the game is going to want seems to be directly proportional to its budget. So, like you were saying, the bigger budget games want mass market because they're pouring millions and millions and millions of dollars into it. They need to do a return on investment. Nowadays, it's hundreds of millions. Versus, so you said in an indie space, you know, you might be kickstarting and crowdfunding it. You might not have. Maybe you get a couple $1 million. It's like
Demo for 5 figures.
Yeah.
Hope you can get crowdfunding.
Hoping to get crowdfunding. So at that point, you want that ravenous audience that's going to support you, and what's the best way for marketability for them to get that out? Because yeah, if you it's also just a matter of thinking about it. The bigger budget you have, the more you can experiment with mechanics, the bigger your team, the more testing you can do, et cetera, et cetera. Small team. If you try to do that, I'm going to conquer everything in this game, but I've only got 5 figures to do it and 2 people. You might release it, most likely not, and it's probably going to be awful. You know, unless you can self-fund it for years and years and years and release your magnum opus. I mean, there's always exceptions, but yeah, I'd say there's something you can glean from multiplayer. Everything that you're also wrong.
Yay! It's hard to figure out your design goals even in isolation of business. And then a lot of students we haven't dealt with. Oh, when money comes in the picture, we have to consider when a business exec or a marketing person comes and says, we want to sell it to this person. You have to translate that, okay, what does that mean in design goals? Because they might do something like, we want to cover the 4 quadrant demographic.
Or fight it.
If you're like, or fight it.
Yeah, I mean, All right, sorry, I know. The other company I worked at is Naughty Dog. I was there for 8 years. And because of the clout they had, they were very much of the mindset of like what you were saying, they want to make the game they're going to make. And it's like, we're making a fun game for ourselves, and then we're going to release it and make the best polished version possible. There are many times marketing came in and said, we want X, and they're like, no, we're not doing it. It's still like, and they're still very much like that because they have that clout. That's not to say every studio has that, but there is some. A lot of times you can, like even on COD, it's the same thing happened was that the Activision has a really heavy marketing department, like it's very marketing driven, and it was a bit of the opposite where they wanted to come and make a lot of changes. They got a lot of their changes. So, but sometimes we still put up a good fight.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't mean just because a business person comes in or a marketing person says we want a demographic to this, you necessarily have to right off the bat be like, okay, let's go ahead and rearrange your whole game. Be like, hold on.
That's a great point for when like business and developer goals are at odds. I think we've heard a lot of stories of that. I'm interested, how do you guys get those to work together as a designer and trying to keep up the design goals?
I'm going to have an unpopular one. At least in my experience, you don't. It's really, really hard unless you are high up in the food chain to actually be able to override anything the money people say. I was able to do it at one of my jobs and none of the others, and that was because I was friends with the guy who made 90% of the decisions. It had nothing to do with my status as a designer. He trusted my decisions because he knows I'm a good designer, but I would actually have to talk with him when we weren't at work, when we were just like doing stuff otherwise, being like, hey, so maybe we should do this because, you know, as an example, there was a week-long discussion about whether or not genitalia should be in ARC. And I was very much on the subject of, hey, if we're going for a purist like survival game, it should be because you should wake up naked. But you know, if you do want to not alienate people, maybe don't add it in right away or make it an option. And if it wasn't for the fact that we were just like having dinner and having this conversation, I was not going to be able to push him on this one. So for a while, just do the little things that you can and don't expect any big changes to get made. Once you're senior or higher, then start working on it.
I'd say as a general approach, one bit of advice I would give, and I think this goes for when you're talking to any department outside of your own or any stakeholder who is not you, is figure out what's important to that person and see if you can make your case in a way that will be compelling and relevant to them. I'm married to a lawyer, so this is perhaps where my perspective on negotiation comes from. But you know, if you're talking to the suits and you're trying to figure out how do I get them excited about my creative idea, maybe don't depend on getting them excited about the creativity of the idea. That's what excites you. See if you can make a case for why it will make your game more marketable, to why it will make your target demographic more attached to your game, to how it might expand your target demographic. Obviously, you'll have to do a little bit of work and research to you know, kind of build your case for this. But that's going to be a lot more compelling than let's do this thing because I think it's going to be better. To which the marketing person or the business-minded person might say, okay, that's great, but how's it going to help us sell more games? How's it going to help us keep everybody at the studio employed? You have to learn to make your case in a way that's going to be appealing to that other person. And if you're a designer talking to your producer, for instance, and you say, this is a feature I think we really need to keep, and I think we can keep it if we're willing to scale back on this other thing. Producers think about time and the cost of production. So if you can make a case that takes into account what they're interested in and what they're immediately concerned with, again, in any discussion, in any negotiation, you're going to find, I think, that's going to, you won't get what you want every time, but I think you will be much better off at least making your case and being heard.
It's actually a good thing both of you basically are saying is politics.
Yeah.
I mean, we hate politics in the fact that there's the politics of I'm trying to screw this other person over so I can get their job. That's crappy, obviously. But in all life, there's an aspect of social politics that we all have to deal with, especially in a creative endeavor. So, yeah, I mean, to your point about having a dinner with your friend that you knew that made 90% of the decisions, that's one of the ways you have to fight back sometimes. It's one of the ways if you strongly believe passionately that something is being, a bad decision is going into the game or something like that, and you have experience, evidence, whatever to back it up, that's a route you have to take sometimes. I mean, or same thing like you're talking to somebody else in the team, you have to figure out what is it that they're looking for, especially if they are a higher up, their marketing person, a VP, whatever it is. What's their goal, and then you want to try to look at like, okay, well, how can we meet your goal, but also meet our goal of like the thing that we're wanting to get, and that's one last point of that is it leads to collaboration. I mean, we all know creative processes are best done in a collaborative environment, but that also extends into the business and the decisions like this. I mean, you're not just collaborating solely on the creative aspect of what color should the thing be. You're also collaborating on like schedule. You're going to collaborate on time. You're going to collaborate on marketing. You're going to collaborate on all of it because you've got these giant machines coming in, all these cars that have to fit together.
I'm good. I agree with all these guys.
So I'm just going to say that mine was kind of a subset of what hers was. Her advice was just spot on. Like 100% everything she said, +1.
Cheap and a lot.
Yeah. I
Can I quote you on that later?
Yeah. Like just, that was the right answer.
You're gonna paste that link for LinkedIn. Okay, cool. Cool. In design, it's a lot like engineering in that it's constantly evolving, different languages and different techniques being used. But design, it's almost like you have to play all the games and you have to study them as you're playing to know what that guy's doing and that guy's doing. If you're going to work in a studio, you have to play their game and try to understand what their process is, what their culture is. How do you guys try to get better and also be aware of how other people are evolving the design space?
I'll start. So I agree. Playing a lot of games to a shallow level is better than deep diving into a few games, especially as a designer. None of my ideas are original. They always come from somewhere. I'm always inspired by something. And understanding where that inspiration comes from helps in communicating that idea to programmers or artists. It helps to translate whatever brain juice is going on in here that's thought of something into something that somebody else's brain can understand. That's one of the hugest challenges of design, is just getting people to understand you. And it's a skill that you build up over time. And nowadays, when I play games, for example, BattleTech, it's now a subconscious thing when I'm studying it, analyzing it, and just picking up on the nuances of all these systems that they put in there and their presentation and other games where I can see what they were inspired by and some of their design decisions. Eventually, after you start studying these games and just pick apart their nuggets of systems and other features, it just becomes instinct, and you know to look for those things. And it also helps you appreciate and enjoy the games again, because early on when you're doing that, it feels more like homework where you're studying it, but after a while, then you get to, oh, I'm having fun in this game and I'm analyzing it as well. So it's kind of a fun balance.
So the other thing I'd say, yes, 100%. Spot on plus one. But the other thing I'd say is also as you evolve as a designer, and you start to take into account that like iteration is the key to good design. You're trying to find stuff, but also learning how to analyze your feelings in terms of how when you play a game, like what is it making you feel? Why are you feeling a certain way? And getting to the core cause. If something's making you frustrated, you can just sit there and say, "Oh, that sucks." And a very easy thing to say is, "Well, obviously this mechanic is horseshit." Clearly some dipstick designed this thing. Whatever it is. But why does it suck? Like actually get into the depth of it and see like, okay, it stinks because there's a little bit of a lag when I move and I'm trying to get my will interpreted in the game and the game's not letting me do it, therefore I'm getting punished for it and I don't feel that's fair. Taking it to that step. And to me that's where it's like, I honestly don't have a lot of, there's so many games I want to play and I have a family, I have a kid now, and it's like I don't have time to play that many games, so I have to be selective in some way, or at the very least, I have to go watch people play them either on YouTube, Twitter, not Twitter, but Twitch, and as well as people at work. I see people like to play games over lunch. I'll stand over their back and I'll kind of look and see what they're doing, ask them questions. But you kind of learn to analyze from afar, and then you kind of learn to get to trust and have confidence in your own ability to play stuff and be like, oh yeah, I see where the fun is in this, or I can envision where this is going if I fix this, this, and this, or we tighten this up, or like, oh, this isn't really working, and it's just too frustrating, this is too much clutter, I think this mechanic is bad, we need to take a step back. And you just kind of start to get that confidence over time. But yeah, the deep analysis of what's going on inside of you, like really pay attention, play things over and over again with a fresh mind, and just be like, why do I feel this way?
I'm going to piggyback off of that a little bit. Anytime I encounter something in a game, and I guess, again, yes, play games as much as you can. I actually really like the advice of shallow play because unfortunately, in order to get everything, you have to. But after you've stopped or after you've had something that you really liked or really didn't like in a game, as soon as you get to a stopping point, stop. Go write down either in a notepad if you have an actual notepad or on like a notepad app, Google Docs or whatever.
What?
Yeah. Write down what you did or did not like and why you did or did not like it and how you felt. That's 3 different things. They're all related, but what it was, why you didn't like it or why you did like it, and how it actually made you feel. I have been shocked looking at my notes, being like, "Oh, really? I was angry and I enjoyed it. I would not have figured that out." When I looked at my notes months later, and if you do that, and then you go back, and especially if you could replay that section and really look at it more analytically, that'll help you figure out not just what to do, or what not to do, but why to do it and why not to do it. Actually looking at your feelings while you're playing a game or immediately after playing a game is probably one of the things that I think not enough developers do. Everyone looks at it most people look at it logically and don't think about the kind of squishy feelingness of it afterwards. And then on a totally different note, piggybacking off of the Twitch thing, watch other people play if you don't have time to do it or while you're doing something else, and do the exact same thing, but for what they seem to be enjoying and feeling.
I think also just talk to other designers, talk to your classmates, talk to the other designers you work with, talk to your friends and family members who play games. Like everyone said, you're not going to have time to play everything, but that's also going to give you good insight into maybe what someone else noticed that you didn't, and into how someone else enjoyed or didn't enjoy something outside of your own experience. Some of my favorite conversations to have are with some of my really opinionated developer friends who don't hate things I love, but will point out things about things I really enjoyed that I didn't notice. And I'm always like, ooh, you didn't like that, tell me why you didn't like that. It's interesting to hear another perspective. I'll think, I didn't notice that because I was so busy enjoying this other side of it. Or, oh, you noticed something really cool about something that I just couldn't get into. It's a really great way to open your mind up to another side of maybe something you haven't played or something you have played but maybe that you experienced in a different way.
One other thing I wanted to piggyback on that. I gave a talk about it was it the Indicate last year, I think it was, but it's worth it as well, and this is going a little bit more philosophical, but it's also worth it as well to kind of study human emotions and like what drives us, because in the end, we're all sacks of chemicals, we're driven by emotion. It's like, there's an actual cluster at the stem of your brain that is designed specifically to interpret things and like pattern match it to see like, is this good, bad, do I like it, is it happy, sad, before the impulse reaches your consciousness, or the actual conscious thinking side of your brain. So it's a reason why you hear people say like, oh, I just got angry at that, and I didn't think about it, or I jumped out of the way of the car, or did something I wasn't supposed to. It's because emotions drive us so much, it's worth looking up in subjects like emotional intelligence, like understanding like how anxiety and fear can drive us. Because even in the workspace, for example, something that just took years to learn until I finally started figuring these things out was like, hey, I didn't want people to come over and focus test my stuff because I was self-conscious about it, and therefore I couldn't handle, I didn't want to face a negative criticism about what it is I was making, and so therefore I'd only ask very specific people in the office whose opinions I really trusted to get their opinions from, when in reality I should have been asking everybody to play and saying, come over here, check this out, look at this, try this, and just learn to deal with that and manage that. I mean, it will affect you in your work life, it will also affect you in helping you make better games, because in the end, games are art, and art is about emotionally connecting with your audience, so the stronger the connection, you know, the more people will like it.
Okay. I kind of zoned out there. That was yeah.
Can I ask you guys to say what games you worked on?
We didn't introduce ourselves.
Oh, you didn't?
No, that's why I was saying things.
Oh, yeah.
That's why I was saying things haphazardly. Sorry.
Let me do that right now. Carrie Patel, currently narrative designer at Obsidian Entertainment, working on Novelist Returning 2, dropping this May.
Yay!
That's pretty much it.
Jason Fader.
I'll give my spiel.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Jason. I've been in the industry for about 20 years now. Started at Blizzard, working on Diablo 2, Warcraft 3, and World of Warcraft. Left to do some indie stuff. Shipped the 42nd game on Steam, which is pretty cool, but sadly it didn't do that well because nobody was really on Steam that much back then. And it was hard to get noticed. And it's the same way now, sadly. Let's see, after that, went to Obsidian, worked on a Canceled Aliens RPG. I was a lead producer on Fallout New Vegas. Shortly after that, went back to do more indie things. I don't know, it always calls me. And then I was recently the game director on a reboot for System Shock, which has gone in a different direction, and I've gone in a different direction from them. So now I'm going to be working on something else I can't talk about.
Yeah, you can introduce me, that's fun.
Would you like it in a different voice?
Sure.
Okay.
Like WWE style.
We have Greg Brown, technical designer! Work on Art, Survival, Evolve! Independent development! Did you have anything to add on that?
I worked at Trendy Entertainment for a while on a game called that game was a hot mess. God, I have so many. If you guys want to hear terrible stories, that game is almost all of mine. Before that, we were working on a game that I think only released in China, if it even released. I know it had limited release out there, I don't know how long that went, called Monster Madness Online, which everyone loved working on. And now I'm on a game in the indie space, which I can't talk too much about.
Cool. Benson, can you talk about your game just before I introduce you?
Which game?
Okay, cool. We'll talk about it. Benson Russell?
Yeah, same as Jason, about 20 years in the industry. Started in 2015, worked on Medal of Honor Allied Assault. Went to Ritual in Dallas, worked on a Star Trek New Force 2 game, and then left there to go work at the EALA, Medal of Honor Pacific Assault, European Assault, and Airborne, as well as their Central Tech team, and then left there, was at Naughty Dog for 8 years, worked on all 4 Uncharted's, The Last of Us, Last of Us Behind, and went to COD, worked on Infinite Warfare, and now I'm at a company called Survios in the VR space on a game that I cannot say. I'm sure you've never heard that.
No.
You'll hear that a lot, by the way. I can't talk about it. Everyone's game that they're currently working on is titled, I can't talk about it.
Unless you give them alcohol.
I was going to say, we're such a small group, like, everybody would always say, oh, I can't talk about it. You throw a couple drinks in. Oh, we're working on this thing. It happens a lot.
Thank you for reminding me of that. Right. Totally knew that before, so I'm going to take a few questions from the audience Discord. How do you catch feature creep? Or what are the red flags? And how do you prevent it?
Okay.
Okay, great. I'm looking forward to this.
The red flag is it's a video game. They all have it. And My way of catching it's gotten me in trouble a couple times, but it's never stuck, where I pretty much just go up to my boss and say, why? Why is this in the game? And he'll give me a reason, and I say, that's a terrible reason. Why is that in the game? And then I usually get talked at for insubordination.
I think the phrase, what if we did this, is a great red flag, because you know someone's usually about to pitch something a little out there. I think also, you know, whenever you're looking at content or looking at a suggestion or a proposal, build out like the second and third order effects of that. So you say, okay, what if we implemented this feature? What if we added in this new outcome for the quest? What does that mean? Well, it means we have to react to this here. It means this character's not going to be present to give this other quest. It means we have to, you know, do X, Y, and Z. But that can be a good way. Usually people aren't thinking about those effects when they present something that's very exciting to them, but someone definitely needs to ask those questions.
So, feature creep. What a fun topic. So, my rule of thumb is basically, if the project is in pre-production, feature creep is not as much of a concern because that's where experimentation happens, that's where you're finding the fun, that's where you're adapting very rapidly, that's where you're prototyping some of these new features. However, once a project enters production, the producers and the production team, they are law. And you cannot deviate from the schedule and what they're trying to do. Otherwise, there will be budget ramifications, marketing ramifications. It depends on the project. If you're going more indie, there is some more wiggle room there, but not a lot. So just remember that the further you are in a project, the less you should be saying, hey, what if we did this? And more, what can we do to finish this sooner? And that's it.
Yes. Yes. Pretty much everything that's been going on this whole talk. I would also add, though, is to that last point, it's worth building in a little extra time, knowing that stuff is going to come out. Just again, it's that iteration thing. So you can pre-pro to a certain amount, and you can get maybe your meat and potatoes and core mechanics done. But as you're playing the game, you're going to realize, oh, we want to make, just like a good, Zelda's kind of the king of this, is that, introduce mechanic, let the player do it, go to the next place, here's the version 2.0 of that mechanic, we have to use it a slightly different way, do it again, and now there's the version 3.0, and you do it again. Those kind of version 2.0, 3.0, whatever, the evolutions that come, usually, those will come about over the course of development. And thankfully, because the core mechanic's already done, it's usually not that difficult to extend it or blend it with another existing mechanic. But it is good to know, or at least to Jason's point about bake that into your schedule with it. Don't plan your schedule out all the way and be like, okay, here's our 2-week sprint. We have 10 days, because we're not counting weekends. If you are, shame on you. We have 10 days of work. We have 10 days we're going to fill here. Put 7 days of work in and leave 3 days. If you get done with those 7 days of work in that 7 days, then great. You can jump ahead and work on something else. Odds are meetings, this stuff, all the things are going to come in at some point. And then also just do, aside from that, do regular audits. So that way, there's something like I know people hate milestones and deliverables in terms of especially when they're external, it's a press thing where it's don't create throwaway work milestones, but create legitimate milestones. Don't sit there and say, okay, we have 3 months of production now, go. Here's your task list, go. That doesn't help, because you also get these other problems of hey, Department A needs Department B to get this thing done before it can work on the thing that it's working on. Well, Department B isn't getting this thing done for another 2 months. Well, Department A is going to twiddle its thumbs. You get all kinds of mismatches and stuff like that. Instead, it's better, if you have 3 months of production, break it into 2-week sprints and say, we're going to get this done by this. And have legit goals that are mini vertical slices of the entire game, and say, we're going to have this thing playable from front to back. It can be ugly, it can be rough, it can have bugs, but it focuses the entire team to say, we're getting stuff in the game, we're playing it, and we're seeing what it's like, and we're doing it together, and we know where we all stand. As opposed to just ants building out a colony and hoping to God the queen's on target, controlling that hive mind. So yeah, that's the only thing.
By the way, if we mention any terms that you guys aren't familiar with, feel free to ask us.
Oh, yeah.
We're used to using these terms on a day-to-day basis, but if any of these are new to you, feel free to ask.
Can you come over your KPIs some more, please?
Oh, God.
I don't even know what your KPI is still, by the way. I know it's a business term.
This is a discussion for afterwards.
I know TKP is.
Get out.
Have you ever dealt with imposter syndrome? I think this is an easy question. And
Yes,
how
yes, 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 yes.
Can I just skip to the best story about imposter syndrome ever? All right. This is, you can find this on Neil Gaiman's blog. This is the greatest story about imposter syndrome ever. So,
Oh, does somebody not know what imposter
Oh, yeah.
syndrome is?
Yeah.
see? I've got a story someone else explained.
Okay. Imposter syndrome. Somebody can check Wikipedia, but here's my quick summary of it. Basically, it's the feeling that you don't know what you're doing, but nobody knows that you don't know what you're doing yet, and so you're trying to fake it until you make it, maybe, but maybe you actually do know what you're doing. It's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of anxiety, a lot of doubt. Everybody in the industry faces it, and if they don't trust them, because they're either overconfident or really cocky or shady. And it's something that we all face and we all need to go through. And imposter syndrome.
What's the story?
So Neil Gaiman was at this big event. I don't remember what it was, with a bunch of
Who is Neil Gaiman?
Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman, very famous writer. I know. Yeah, very famous writer. Amazing works. American Gods, Sandman series. Go read some of the stuff. He's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, he does.
Okay.
So he's at this big event with a bunch of people who've done a bunch of things, and he feels really dumb because he doesn't think he deserves to be in this group of people. So he's talking to an older gentleman who walks up to him and says, "Hey, I'm a big fan. Just want to let you know, everything you do is great. I feel a little weird being here because, I mean, I haven't really done anything." And Neil Gaiman says, "What are you talking about? You've done huge things." He goes, "No, I just go where people tell me to go." And Neil Gaiman says, "But you were the first man on the moon." And Neil Armstrong says, "Yeah, but I literally just went where I was told. You guys all create things." And Neil Gaiman has never had to worry about imposter syndrome since there because Neil Armstrong has imposter syndrome. If he has it, then it's stupid and no one should have it. But we all do. My story is totally mine, was great.
That should be a GDC opener.
Yeah. I know we can, yes, and I know we can keep talking about imposter syndrome for like days, but with a few minutes left, I'd like to get some questions. Hand over there.
What I want to ask is, especially because how the market's going with game development, instead of having everything out all at once, it's slowly growing through longevity of like downloadable content or free downloadable content, trying to make people play as long as possible. How has it affected you guys as game developers?
It hasn't really affected me much. It just means I'm working on live product instead of the next product. It really hasn't affected me almost at all.
There's a term called games as a service, which is getting a lot of steam, and it's been brewing for a bit. Basically, the longer people are playing your game, the more you can monetize them, and that's what a lot of these businesses want to do. And so they'll come out with, I mean, we've seen expansion packs since the 90s, and we're getting more DLC stuff. Loot boxes are another form of it. It's not going away. Loot boxes probably will, but they'll change it to something else. But expanded content, games as a service, we're not going to see an end to it, especially with technology, cloud-based capabilities, and just keeping people playing your game and broadcasting it on Twitch. It's like going over. So how it's affected me as a developer, I need to consider it, and I need to think about that a lot with how long players will be playing my games, and maintaining their enjoyment, and also making publishers or investors happy, so that they can get a decent return on their investment, so that they want to work with me again. And to do that, you tend to need to maximize your profits and minimize the amount of time you spend creating that content. So that way you're a good investment and deal for the publisher.
So, yeah, same as Jason, at least from the AAA sides that I've worked at. Survios being more like smaller in the VR spaces, yeah, you always have to figure out ways to keep yourself in the market and stuff like that. I mean, something to consider, there's multiple ways you can always take this stuff. So yes, you hear games as a service and everyone goes like, oh, fuck, you know, whatever, they just want to scream about it and cut people's heads off. But the one thing to consider is that we live in a society that requires money, unfortunately. So people have to make it. I think to Jason's point, you know, you could equate in a philosophical sense that DLC or an add-on pack or an expansion has existed for decades. That's always been around. No one's had a problem with it. I think the issue is when it feels like companies are cash grabbing, or they're nickel and diming, you know, or they're playing like with some like loot boxes necessarily playing off gambling addiction and things of that nature. Like that's where it gets like really skeevy. But there does need to be a way where, you know, developers do need to make their money, so you keep paying their employees, so you keep making more games, or whether you're an indie, whether you're big, AAA, whatever, you need to be able to do that. And I'd argue, you can look at a game like League of Legends. I mean, that is completely a game as a service, right? I mean, it's free, and you just willingly or you willfully pay for character skins and whatever else, you know, little add-ons here and there that you want. And they do it obviously great, you know, they've entered the East-based market and stuff like that, but I think that's an example of like a good way to do it well, that's well receptive. That doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing.
Carrie, and I'm going to take 2 more questions. Ask those questions. One. Yeah.
Actually, there's something I want to say about that last one,
Okay.
just because it seems like a big thing that people need to do that isn't often talked about.
1, 2, and remember, if you need a question asked, these people are still going to be, they're still going to be there.
Yes, warm us.
All right, I'm going to give the short version of this.
They're very approachable, even though they're fairly seasoned designers. I say that with someone having worked 20 years.
I've only got 5.
We haven't tossed this, so I don't think we're
Yeah, don't worry about
Yeah,
that.
no.
That's not a problem.
Well, they're very approachable.
Yeah, the quick version of this is the one thing it has changed in me after I said nothing was figuring out how to make paying for something fun. That is a skill I've never had to work on until I was put on a monetization team, and I did some research, and you have to make paying for the game fun. And that is the hardest thing I have ever worked on.
To offer maybe a slightly sunnier side of things, not talking about DLC and expansion content specifically, that can actually be a pretty cool way to experiment with new content, new stories, and new mechanics. The White March, which was the expansion to the first Pillars game, was a ton of fun to work on. We got to build a new story. We got to tell a slightly different kind of story. And I know the designers were, area designers were trying new kinds of encounters and trying to focus on, you know, building more challenging, you know, custom encounters in a lot of these scenes. So that can actually be a pretty cool way to see what your core fans, the people who are going to follow you into expansion content, what they think of something that you might want to try that might be a little too risky to build your base game around.
All right. So there are mentions of replayability and shareability of games, and there are mentions of Ark and Minecraft and Diablo. What role do generative systems play in your design pipeline?
What do you mean by generative? You mean
Like
procedural stuff? Systemic?
Yes.
That so depends on the game.
Yeah.
That's too open-ended for me to give a good answer.
What are you making? Are you making a Diablo style dungeon crawler where it makes sense that we need tons of content and the only way to make it is procedural because you can't just dump that many artists into it? That's one way to do it. But if are you making like a 1-hour experience where it's like, no, we can bespoke everything, it doesn't make any sense to make a procedural system.
The procedural systems that go into a Diablo type game or Borderlands type game is way different than a roguelike.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or like a No Man's Sky.
Yeah.
If I could actually just question, because I know he's working on a procedural generation tool that actually procedurally generates levels. So, say what kind of features generally are used in procedural generation levels, or what could be very useful for a design?
Actually, I am working on something like that. Okay. Sorry, it's been a long day. So actually, there is a game that I've been working on that does leverage procedural systems, and one of the big things that we look at is how do you make something that is procedural or basically has a high degree of randomness in its generative systems, and still let it feel like it has that handcrafted personal touch. It is damn tricky. Because with a lot of procedural systems, they're rule-based and condition-based. And oftentimes, basically these systems, it's almost like a bunch of Lego blocks. And these systems assemble these Lego blocks in certain ways. But they're always the same Lego blocks. And players will get wise to that, and they'll get tired of that content. And so there's an inherent danger with procedural systems and just content fatigue from the player base. No Man's Sky, which I mentioned earlier, was a prime example of that. After the 30th planet, I was seeing patterns, and I saw how their procedural engine was working, and I was starting to get bored because none of it felt like it was really a unique experience anymore. It's not a problem I've solved. There is a need for it, especially in roguelike games or very large exploration and discovery games. I think the technology will get better, and I'd be very, very curious to see what the procedural space looks like 5 to 10 years from now when we get better content that's feeling more handcrafted but is procedurally generated.
I'll give you someone else's advice. A designer at a talk I went to once about procedurally generated content said that one of the best ways to make things feel more handcrafted is to add exceptions that are really, really rare. So it kind of combats that exact thing you're talking about where, oh, it always works this way until it doesn't. And then if you want to get really crazy, you add in like double exceptions where it always works this way until it doesn't, except for when it does again. So it's gonna way overcomplicate your system, but it helps it feel a little more handcrafted. That's from the Shadow of War guys.
Okay, so we were talking about earlier about how sometimes you have like your managers come in and say, hey, we need your game to do this. From what I hear, that is almost always a terrible decision that hurts the game. It's like, or at least hurts the quality of it, so like, it doesn't hold as much of a high reputation. It might make more money, like go to the cool, but like it doesn't reach the point where like, you have everyone talking about like, oh, League of Legends or Overwatch, like whatever it's fine. How come they're willing to like not take that little bit more investment to reach out and like get people to really love their game and then just hold that money down? And they have really power into that.
I'll start, and this will be quick, because sometimes they're right. So those business people or even the publishers, that's what we were talking about earlier, where you need to come up for air because you're so close. It's the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, where you're so close to it, you don't see what's happening around. And that's what the role of the publisher is for. They are sanity checking you. And sometimes when they come in and say, yeah, you know, we really need you guys to change this because this just isn't testing well and it's not fun, all I ask whenever a publisher says that to me is that they can explain it and defend it. And going back to the whole legal thing, as long as they can articulate it and defend why they feel a certain way, then there can be a meeting of the minds and either a compromise, or you completely take in their feedback, or you reject it and you defend your stance on it. And as long as it's a publisher-investor relationship where, with mutual respect, there's always a negotiation phase where they allow themselves to be convinced, ideally.
I would also, just to add on top of that as well, is there's also a bit of the, what do you call it when it's like, the negatives, they outweigh the positives in terms of like
Negative
public,
bias.
yeah, negative bias. So it's like, sure, it's a lot of fun for, as developers, you know, we all like to gather around the campfire and tell our stories. Yes, the worst stories are the ones you're gonna remember the most and be like, can you believe this happened? You know, all kinds of crazy stuff like that. But it's also in light for every one or two of those. I'm not saying the 2 or 3 that were like Jason's point. No, it was accurate. It was good. I can say when we were finishing up Infinite Warfare, there was a bit of a hot mess going on in that project in terms of like leadership and making decisions. And Pat Kelly, VP from Activision, came over and everyone was scared. It's like, nope, project wouldn't have got done and it wouldn't have been as good as it was if it wasn't for Pat Kelly coming in and like making some decisions that needed to be made. Even though we didn't like all of them, it's, you know, he was looking at a holistic picture and came in and did the right thing in that regard. So.
Be very careful about entering into a mindset and a pattern of conflict and antagonism. Be very careful about deciding who the good guys and the bad guys are on your team or at your company, because that will become a self-fulfilling prophecy at some point. At the end of the day, everybody wants to make a good game. Everybody wants to make a game that's going to sell well, do well for the company, and keep everybody happily employed. People just have different opinions sometimes and different data on what's going to achieve that goal most effectively. So, you know, like Jason said, it's important to listen to the case someone else is making to you. And sometimes it's not going to end up being what you said or what they said. Sometimes what they said will open up a path between, like a middle path somewhere, and you'll see, you know, maybe this isn't the solution we want, but it points out a problem we didn't recognize. And there's maybe a way to solve it that's going to preserve what's important to you and what you think is going to make the game really great. But just be careful of sitting down into any conversation or any negotiation with the feeling that you and someone else are adversarial.
So then making mistakes is the exception, not the rule.
Well,
It's 50-50.
generally speaking,
It's up in the air.
Be open-minded.
think of it this way. How often do designers make mistakes? How often do engineers make mistakes? How often do artists make mistakes? Yeah, and so production will do the same thing. They're usually good at their job, or they get fired. So, you know, if they have a reason behind it, and generally if you think it's a bad idea, ask them why. Like, I don't remember which one of you two said it, I think.
We're all collective
Okay, yeah.
consciousness now.
Ask them why. If they back it up, they're probably right. You gotta let the trust go.
And you're never being attacked, it's never personal. Always try to be understanding and put yourself in their shoes and see where they're coming from.
I mean, one quick thing as well to add to that is it brings up the topic of like, I mean, game design is like 99% failure. I mean, you have to fail often. 9.5. You have to fail often and a lot to find the fun. So, I mean, you have to have a culture and acceptance of like, hey, we're all trying, you know, we're all trying, we're all going in the same direction, and you have to be allowed to fail, because usually you'll find the good stuff out of it. But also, I would say the one exception to that is anybody named Shad. Fuck that guy.
Production's job is usually to prevent you from hurting yourself. They will try and stop you from being your own worst enemy, because we want more of everything we do, and we only have so much time, we only have so much money. So when they say, maybe do it this way, it'll be better if we do it this way, all of the numbers say, maybe give them the benefit of the doubt.
And we're done.
Okay.
Really good. Carrie Patel, Jason Fader, Benson, Greg Brown!